I'm Robert McBride, and this is Everyday People, a program in which we investigate the lives of people making a difference in our community. Great. Good morning. This is Robert McBride with an episode of Everyday People, talking to people in our community and from other communities that make a difference. On today's show, we are talking with Leah Stein, who is visiting from the Philadelphia area and is a choreographer that has a dance company. And I've not really met Leah till today, but we have met through another friend, a woman down in Wilmington, Ann Drzowski, who does all kinds of community work in choreography and placemaking things. And so Leah was up in the area, and we thought it'd be great to have a conversation, and then I'll show her around downtown Bellows Falls later. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Good to
great.
be here.
So I guess we'll just kind of start off with your kind of identity at this point as
Sure.
a dancer, choreographer,
Sure.
still actively running a dance company. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, sure. Thank you. Well, let's see. Where do I start? The company that I have is focused primarily on creating site-specific dance works, often very collaborative with other artists, and community participants. And the idea is to really enliven a sense of place, to activate the physical and the historical aspects of a location. And my key ingredients are movement, sound, and then place, what makes up a place.
Great.
Yeah.
So right now, you're centered in Philadelphia?
Yeah.
Okay. And is that, did you grow up in Philadelphia? Did you go to school in Philadelphia? How did you end up in Philadelphia?
Yeah, so I grew up in the Hudson Valley, New York
Okay,
State,
okay.
and I went to college, and after college, a really close friend of mine got a job at a dance company in Philadelphia. And I kind of naively thought, okay, after I graduated college, I'm going to figure out how to be a dancer,
Right.
and I'll give it a year,
Right.
and I'll go to different cities and find out how I can do this. So she was there, so that was my reason for going. And within a very short time, I found great connections and people and opportunity, and started to make a living, make my life there.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you also, with your dance company, travel around much right now? Or
we have in the past a lot, and had different tours in Eastern Europe. I've been to a lot of different places, Japan and Scotland and Canada, and some other places in the U.S. we've traveled. We did a major project in San Francisco one of the aspects of our work is working with singers. I've worked with choruses. I'm going like this because it's many singers.
Yeah.
And there's a chorus in Philadelphia, the Mendelssohn Club of Philadelphia, and I worked with the artistic director, Alan Harler, for several years. We commissioned composers to create scores that would allow the singers to be moving, not necessarily on bleachers with their scores. And I love the process, and I love the challenge of making work with that many people. The one work that we took to San Francisco was called Battle Hymns, and it had 100. Well, when the show there, we had 130 singers, and they were choreographed. So the whole, the performance was the movement of the singers and the dancers. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. So what pieces are you currently working on?
So currently, I'm working. Well, it's interesting because I've done so many different locations, and that usually dictates, from gardens to abandoned buildings to parking lots to train garages to cemeteries. And in 2015, when my dad passed away, and I also had an injury, it was a big turning point in my work. And ever since then, I've started this new kind of chapter of work that I'm calling Standing in the Wake. And it's about being alive right now and kind of honoring loss and then regeneration. So that's kind of the big umbrella of the work. I did a piece that I'm continuing to work on called Interior in September with a violinist, and it's kind of a more internal, personal piece. And another piece I'm working on that just did the first draft is called Portraits, and it was at an art museum, and in response to an art show that was called A More Perfect Union, ? Race-powered sex in the representation of couples. So it was a beautiful exhibition of couples through artists' view through couples, a century at least. And so we really focused on different paintings, and I made a series of duets.
And where was that exhibit?
It was at the Woodmere Art Museum in Philadelphia.
Okay. And the performance was?
The performance was right there in the museum with the dancers right near the paintings.
Okay.
So I was very interested in the relationship of the physical body and then how the body's in the paintings and then the real flesh of body and that conversation. And then, of course, two people, it's very interesting. There's many, many, many things that can be communicated. And
cool. That's great. So when you're... So you also sort of have a connection to Vermont, as it turns out. I was reading some of your information, and in Windsor, Vermont. And, it's so amazing how many people I do talk with, not just on these interviews, but in general, anywhere I am in the country. And it's always sort of interesting. People often have a relationship to Vermont, this tiny little state,
so true.
that people do it. So your parents, I think you said, were living up in Windsor for 30 years.
Yeah,
Windsor, Vermont.
And it's funny you say that because I have so many friends in Philadelphia, as it turns out now, who are starting a connection with Vermont. So just to support what you just said. So when I graduated college and moved to Philadelphia, my parents moved to Vermont.
Oh.
And they were looking for to start, their retirement, actually. And unlike some people, they love cold and they love winter. So they chose to have their their third year, that age in Vermont. So I've been coming up on the train for about 30 years. I drive also, but I love that. I love the train. There used to be the Montrealer, actually.
Right, yeah, the Vermonter that went to Montreal. There still exists a Montrealer, but that's on the other side of the state, and that does go from New York. Just to keep the train stuff straight, there is a Montreal that goes from New York State to Montreal, and it goes up through the western side of the eastern side of New York State. And goes in. But the Vermonter used to cross into Montreal, and then they stopped that. I think when we were trying to keep the train still running in Vermont, and I think your father was involved in some of that you were mentioning. They sort of cut that changeover because it was an expense of change of crew and customs and all that stuff. Right. And I think there's always sort of been some talk about hoping to re-extend that again at some point.
I've heard that too.
Which would be great.
It's so convenient to go over and sleep, get on at night, wake up in the morning and be here. Yeah. But I've just grown to love it. It feels like home. My parents were here, so and then I've met people in the community, and now there seems to be this migration. Anna is here in Wilmington.
Yeah.
So I feel like this very strong connection to the landscape too.
Right.
Having grown up in a rural area and then being in the city for so long, I actually have a thirst.
So do you think you might follow in your parents' footsteps, part of the DNA
there is some DNA.
Might end up in Windsor or Bellows Falls or somewhere in southeastern Vermont? No, it's a really interesting area, a very rich area. Most people think of Vermont as Montpelier and Burlington, which are the bigger cities and the capital, but actually the southeastern part is really, we're like a couple hours from Boston and from several airports, and, I can walk across the street at my house in Bellows Falls to get on the train and go to New York City or Philadelphia or Washington, which is, everyone complains about how long it takes, but I would think people would be excited about how long things take to just chill out and relax. You see everyone coming out of their yoga classes. Well, skip the yoga class that day and take the train, relax on it. Take advantage of that time to kind of unhook or read or doze off, It's
There's
really
something.
interesting.
It is. I love the trip for that reason. And there is something about these small once industrial towns, and now, they're going through their own cycle. And how does it live in this contemporary moment? And
Right.
I think it's probably from the influence of my dad. Post-industrial landscape is interesting to me, especially living in Philadelphia. I've done so many pieces in that kind of in between. I even did a piece called Bardo that was this. I was often I find a site, and that's what I realize I want to make a piece there. But I was looking for a place that had that in between. A building had been taken down, and then you see the echo of the building that was on the two sides that are exposed, and whatever's happening there, I find interesting combination of nature and architecture. So
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, really, I find that as a inspiration.
So do you, first of all, I assume you have a website of some sort that people
Yeah.
can take a look at. Do you want to share that with our
Sure.
audience very
Sure.
slowly so people could look things up and probably push buttons and see
Okay.
trailers of pieces you're performing? I actually
Sure.
did that myself.
Oh, great. So the website is Leah Stein Dance Co. My name, LeahStein, danceco.org.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
So, I think, it seems like you're also drawn to creating pieces in just alternate spaces or spaces that exist. I'm sure you've produced things that are in,
On a
typical,
stage,
quote
right.
unquote, formal dance spaces with the
Right.
lines and the lights. But I think I'm sort of picking up on something, and tell me if I'm wrong, that it's
Yeah.
you'd kind of rather accept the space and the
Yeah.
challenge of what it is
Yeah.
and integrate that into the choreography, or it's part of actually the partner in the choreography
Exactly.
of working around with it, which is,
That's right.
interesting because, we think a lot of setting everything up perfectly, but, what is that, if I go to the theater, I want to be able to see stuff unless
Yeah.
the piece is totally created that way. But I think it sounds like you sort of enjoy the challenge or the inspiration of what the space brings to it.
That's exactly it, and that's even the language I use as a partner. I think of the site, the space, the sounds there, the movement is the the ingredient, the partner of the process. And I made this piece called Bellows Falls.
Oh yeah, okay.
Because of my relationship with Vermont and my dad's relationship with trains, and he died in 2015, and I thought I started on this a moment ago. It was a real shift in my work, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I had an injury and I was pretty much very limited in my movement, and I started on the floor just rolling. But I also was in this gorgeous studio space, post an old industrial building, and there were 4 windows, and the light would come in the afternoon and just leave these beautiful, rectangles of sunlight on the floor. So in terms of, this piece was a combination of what I was bringing. They all are, but sometimes I really start with the site. This was what I was bringing, and then how to allow this space to be totally a partner in that. So, light was very important. Light is really important in my work, as natural light or found light. So the light moved across the floor during the course of the performance, and there was something nice too about the audience facing the wall, and they looked like train windows.
Right. So when you get involved with something like that, do you just accept how the light changes? Say you're going to do a performance a week apart in that space.
Yes.
What would you just let the light happen? The light just is something that's happening and it would change between those performances?
Right.
Or do you try to, set the performance times with that? What is your kind of flexibility, or what is your fascism about making it happen in a certain way?
Right, that's great. I definitely work with what is there and then make decisions around it. So I always am looking at when does the sun set and rise, and kind of, if I'm planning and rehearsing beforehand, but anticipating that the light will be this when the performance happens. That piece I mentioned earlier, Bardo, was purposely scheduled at the end of the day so that it was outside and right on Broad Street in Philadelphia, and it started when the sun was still up, and then as the piece went on, the sun set, and then the nightlife of Broad Street was there.
Comes in.
So
Yeah.
I'm very conscious of what the light is, and there is this, really wanting it to be of that. So sometimes I want that, the light to the dark, or I want that. So sure.
Right.
But
So are you familiar with the work of that light sculptor, for lack of a better word, James Turrell?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, they have a beautiful piece of his at the Ringley Museum in Sarasota, which is the only place I've experienced them in different places, but the experience of seeing it there, it's a 45-minute piece of light, and the aperture to the outside and the setting. It's really quite amazing piece.
Quite amazing.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you mentioned him. I love his work, and I learned about his work as a young artist. I think it was really influential. That sensibility of not trying to make something happen, but just allowing to notice what's happening, and just to be in that state where you're more receptive.
Right.
I love his work.
So if you think of since you've been around a while, dancing and running your company, and if you think about maybe some other people either around the state or the country that you share a similar sensibility with. I know I don't want to make you too specific, but are there just different artists that you think of or that you've collaborated with, or you sort of respect their work that's doing it?
Let's see, there's so many people. Where to start? Well, as a young dancer, I was certainly influenced by Trisha Brown Company very much, and that relationship to the body, which was not about making it into a perfect shape, but was very fluid. Also influenced by a lot of the improvisers. Improvisation is really key in my work, and I do feel like more sometimes of a jazz musician than a classical player.
Okay.
And in terms of movement. So, I had great teachers in improvisation, Ishmael Houston Jones and Simone Forti and Deborah Hay, and then now recently wonderful collaborators in Philadelphia. There's a percussionist I've worked with for 20 years, Toshi Makihara, who actually, I feel like our collaboration helped define for me this continuum between movement and sound, and that it really is a continuum rather than here's the music, here's the dance. And so he's so physical, and sometimes he would do movements, but there's no sound, and sometimes, I'm making the sound. So Toshi and Ralph Lemon is a New York artist, but he's done all kinds of really interesting, breaking open the field, traveling to other countries, and has a very unique approach to culture and history. Eiko and Koma, who are Japanese born. They live in New York, and slow. They just move so slowly. And it's just, again, as a young artist, I was deeply influenced by them. And they've performed at the Dartmouth College.
Oh, the center,
Yeah, outside, not necessarily in the series, but outside. I know they did their.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
There. And then there's a lot of sight artists that are. Jennifer Monson did a piece called Bird Brain, where she followed the bird migrations.
Yes. She's really terrific.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit
fantastic.
familiar with her work because Vermont Performance Lab in Guilford had done a piece with her at Sarah Coffey, and it was really pretty phenomenal.
Oh, I can imagine. I love her.
Yeah.
She was really influential to me, too.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
This is great. So I think we're about ready to kind of wrap up. We've got a few more minutes, but I got the high sign, and I don't want to miss anything that you might want to mention or anything. So I want to just remind the audience we're talking to Leah Stein, choreographer and dancer with her company in Philadelphia. And she's visiting southeastern Vermont for a few days, and we kind of hooked her in through friends to participate in talking to us and sharing some of her vision. So, and she does have a website, which is her name, Leah Stein, S-T-I-N.
E-I.
E-I-N, all one word.
Dance.
Co.
.org.
.org. Great. So we like you to check that out again. Is there anything in sort of some parting remarks or performance coming up or anything you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure, thanks. Well, this summer I'm spending more time in Vermont, and
Okay.
I'm interested in starting to maybe have some kind of presence here. I've been in touch with Sarah Coffey actually about the Vermont Performance Lab, and with Anna in Wilmington. But also I'm interested in creating some kind of connection here through my creative work, perhaps making a site work in Bellows Falls, or we'll see. I don't know. I'm developing those connections, and then I'll go back to Philadelphia. I'm having an ongoing collaboration with the Woodmere Art Museum, so
Great.
We'll be starting on a project in the fall.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming up here and talking to us a little bit about what you're doing.
And I just thought I'd have one more plug.
Yes, okay.
Because I've been talking about my dad, but my mom is also an artist, a Vermont artist.
Okay.
And she'll be having a retrospective at the Ava Gallery in October 2019.
Oh, great. Okay. And does she have the same name?
She's Martha Stein.
Okay.
Yeah, and
what-
visual artist.
Visual artist.
She's a fiber artist.
Okay.
And it's she does really beautiful, amazing integration of sculptural elements
Okay.
and fiber, and sometimes she's painting the canvas.
Great. Well, something else to look forward to. Fantastic. So I want to thank everyone for watching this episode. I want to thank Fact TV for being such a great resource in the community for us to share stories. And I also want to thank the underwriters that help ramp out First Light, formerly Sovereignnet, Chroma Technology, the Vermont Arts Council, and the National Endowment for the Arts. So until next time, see you on the square. RAMP would like to acknowledge organizations that help make this program possible through Fact TV, including the Vermont Arts Council, the National Endowment for the Arts, Chroma Technology, the Wyndham Foundation, and Stewart Property Management.